You know, after 35 years running into burning buildings, I thought nothing could shake me anymore. I believed I had seen every kind of sacrifice, every kind of heartbreak. But on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, a man walked into our firehouse, carrying a weight so heavy, so impossibly unfair, that it broke something inside me. What he told me about what had happened to him just 48 hours earlier, what he had been through in the moment he was only trying to save his child. I still lose sleep over it. And when I heard the full story, when I understood what life had done to this man, I knew I had to do something that went beyond my job description. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day, because this is a story about sacrifice, about fatherhood, and about what happens when the system fails the very people it should be protecting. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a fire captain in Camden, New Jersey since 1990. That's 35 years of running toward danger while everyone else runs away. 35 years of pulling people from wreckage and watching families lose everything in a matter of minutes. Every morning, I'll wake up at 4:45, and the first thing I do is check my phone, not for messages, but for the overnight dispatch log. Old habit. My mother raised 7 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment in North Camden. She worked double shifts at the textile factory 6 days a week. She never complained. Not once. And she taught me something I carry with me every single day. She said, the measure of a man isn't what he does when things are easy. It's what he does when the world is trying to break him. That's when you find out who you really are. I get to the firehouse every morning at 6 o'clock. My lieutenant, Danny Reeves, has been with me for 19 years. He knows my coffee order, he knows which chair I sit in, and he knows not to talk to me until I've had at least half a cup. He can read a room better than anyone I've ever met. He knows when something bad is coming before the alarm even sounds. That Wednesday, November 8th, I remember walking in, and the rain was coming down in sheet. It was one of those cold autumn storms that turns the streets into rivers and makes you grateful for a roof over your head. Danny looked up when I came in and said, "Morning, Cap." He had that look on his face, the one he gets when something is eating at him. I asked him what was going on, and he told me we had a visitor coming in, a man from the neighborhood who needed to talk to someone. Danny said, "Cap, this guy's story. I don't even know where to start. Just hear him out." I poured my coffee and sat down at the table in the common room. I've had hundreds of people come through that firehouse over the years. People who lost their homes, people looking for help, people who just needed someone to listen. We're more than firefighters in this neighborhood. We're the last safety net for people who have nowhere else to turn. At about 7:30, the front door opened and a man walked in. He was maybe 40, but he looked 60. His clothes were wrinkled like he'd slept in them. His eyes were red and swollen, and he had that hollowed out look that comes from days of not eating and not sleeping. He was soaking wet from the rain, and he was shaking, but I don't think it was from the cold. I stood up and extended my hand. I said, "I'm Captain Frank DeLuca. Come sit down, get warm." He took my hand, and his grip was weak, like he didn't have any strength left. He said, "Thank you, sir. My name is James Whitfield. Danny said you might be able to help me." I pulled out a chair for him, and Danny brought him a cup of coffee. James wrapped both hands around it like it was the only warm thing left in the world. I sat across from him and I said, "Tell me what's going on, James." He looked down at the table for a long moment. Then he looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes nearly knocked the breath out of me. It wasn't just sadness. It was a man at the absolute end of his rope, a man who had been beaten down so many times that he wasn't sure he could stand up again. He took a breath and started talking, and what he told me over the next hour changed the way I see the world. He said, "Captain, I have 2 children. My daughter Lily, she's 8, and my son Marcus. He's 5. Their mother left when Marcus was 6 months old, just walked out one morning and never came back. No note, no phone call, nothing. I've raised them alone since then." He paused, and I could see him fighting to keep his composure. "Lily was diagnosed with kidney disease when she was 4. It's been 4 years of hospitals and dialysis and watching my baby girl get weaker and weaker. She's been on the transplant list for 2 years, but there's never a match. Never. Every time the phone rings, I think maybe this is it. Maybe today is the day. But it never is." His voice cracked, and he pressed his knuckles against his eyes. I waited. In 35 years, I've learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is just be quiet and let them talk. He continued, "3 weeks ago, her doctor told me she was running out of time. Her kidneys were failing faster than they expected. He said if she didn't get a transplant within the next few months, she wouldn't make it. She's 8 years old, Captain. She still believes in the tooth fairy. She still thinks I can fix anything." He stopped and his whole body shook with a sob he was trying to hold back. Danny stood behind him, and I could see Danny's jaw clenching. Danny has 3 kids of his own. He understood what this man was feeling. James collected himself and went on. "I got tested to see if I was a match, and by some miracle, I was. My kidney was compatible with Lily's. The doctor said we could do the surgery. He said it was her best chance, only real chance. I went home that night and I held both my kids and I cried because for the first time in 2 years, I had hope. Real hope." I leaned forward. I could feel where this story was going and my chest was already tightening. This surgery was scheduled for Monday, November 6th. I had it all planned. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, she's 72 years old, and she's been like a grandmother to my kids. She agreed to watch Marcus while Lily and I were at the hospital. Everything was set. I took the week off from work. I work at the warehouse on Federal Street, loading truck. They gave me the time. No questions asked. My boss, Mr. Torres, he even took up a collection from the guys on the floor to help with my bills while I was out. He stopped and took a sip of coffee. His hands were shaking so badly that some of it spilled on the table. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Sunday night, the night before the surgery, Mrs. Patterson called me. She was in the emergency room. She'd fallen down her stairs and broken her hip. She was in tears, apologizing, saying she was so sorry she couldn't watch Marcus. I told her not to worry about it, to take care of herself. But inside, I was panicking. I had no one else. My family's gone. Lily's mother is gone. I don't have friends who can take a day off work to watch a 5-year-old. I called everyone I could think of. I called the church. I called Marcus's school. I called a daycare center. Nobody could help on such short notice. He looked at me, and the desperation in his eyes was something I will never forget. "Captain, I couldn't cancel that surgery. If I canceled, they might not reschedule for weeks, maybe months. And Lily didn't have weeks. She didn't have months. The doctor told me her levels were critical. Every day we waited was a day we might not get back." I nodded. I understood. Any parent would understand. When your child's life is on the line, there is nothing you won't do. Nothing. Monday morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. I got Lily ready. I got Marcus ready. I put them both in the car and I drove to Cooper University Hospital. When we got there, I explained the situation to the nurses. I begged them. I said, "Please, isn't there someone who can sit with my son while I'm in surgery? I have no one else. I have nowhere to send him." They were sympathetic, but they told me they couldn't be responsible for a child who wasn't a patient. Hospital policy. They said I needed to find childcare. His voice was breaking now. The tears were falling, and he wasn't trying to stop them anymore. I sat in that hospital parking lot with my 2 kids, and I wanted to scream. My daughter was inside dying. My kidney was the one thing that could save her, and I couldn't go through with it because I had no one to watch my son. I sat there for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do. And then I made a decision that I knew was wrong, but it was the only choice I had. The room was completely silent. Danny had sat down at the table. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. I parked the car in the hospital parking garage right next to the elevator on the first floor. I cracked the windows. I locked the door. I gave Marcus my phone and I showed him how to call 911. I told him, Daddy has to go inside to help Lily get better. I need you to be the bravest boy in the world and wait here for me. Don't unlock the doors for anyone you don't know. I'll be right back." He looked at me with those big brown eyes and he said, "Okay, Daddy, I'll be brave." James put his head in his hands. I had to look away for a moment. I stared at the ceiling and blinked hard because I could feel the burn behind my own eyes. I went inside. I told the nurses I had arranged childcare. I lied. I lied because my daughter was dying and my kidney was the only thing between her and a grave. They prepped me for surgery. The whole time, all I could think about was Marcus sitting in that car. I kept telling myself, it'll be a few hours. He'll be okay. He's a smart kid. He'll be okay. He lifted his head and looked straight at me. The surgery took 4 hours. 4 hours my 5-year-old son sat in that car alone. When I came out of recovery, still groggy, still in pain, the first thing I asked for was my phone. And when the nurse handed it to me, I had 7 missed calls. 3 were from Marcus. 4 were from the police. I felt my stomach drop. I knew what was coming. Someone had seen Marcus in the car and called the police. The officers came and found him. He was scared, but he was safe. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't in danger. The car was in a covered garage. The temperature was fine. He had water and snacks and my phone. But the police took him. They called Child Protective Services. And by the time I was conscious enough to talk, there was a social worker at my bedside telling me I was being charged child endangerment and that my son was in emergency foster care. His voice went flat when he said that, like all the emotion had been wrung out of him and there was nothing left. "Captain, I gave my kidney to save my daughter's life. I did the only thing any father would do. And while I was lying in a hospital bed with a hole in my side, they took my son away from me. They put my 5-year-old in a stranger's house because I didn't have a babysitter." I sat there and I couldn't speak. In 35 years, I've pulled children from burning buildings. I've held parents while they screamed. I've seen things that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives. But what this man was telling me was a different kind of horror. It was the horror of a system that couldn't see past its own rules to the human being standing in front of it. Danny spoke first. He said, "James, where is Lily now?" James's face changed when he heard his daughter's name. A light came into his eyes that hadn't been there before. "She's recovering. The surgery was successful. The doctor says her new kidney is working perfectly. She's going to be okay. My baby girl's going to be okay." For one brief second, I saw joy on his face, pure, unfiltered joy, but it disappeared just as quickly. But Marcus is still in foster care. I have a court hearing in 2 weeks. The charge is child endangerment. If I'm convicted, I could lose custody of both my children, both of them. I gave my kidneys so Lily could live, and now the state wants to take them both away from me. I stood up from the table because I couldn't sit still anymore, paced the length of the common room. My mind was racing. I thought about my own kids, now grown, thought about the choices I'd made as a father, the times I'd put them in situations that weren't ideal because life doesn't always give you perfect options. I thought about what I would do if one of my children was dying and I had the power to save them, but the world kept throwing obstacles in my way. I would do exactly what James Whitfield did. Any decent parent would. I turned back to him and I said, "James, I'm going to help you. I don't know exactly how yet, but I'm going to help you." Now, let me pause here for just a second. I need to ask you something. If you were in James's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have canceled the surgery and risked your daughter's life? Or would you have done exactly what he did? Leave me a comment because I actually read them. And if this story is hitting you the way it hit me, hit that like button for me. Over the next 48 hours, I made more phone calls than I've made in my entire career. I called every person I knew. I called the fire chief. I called the mayor's office. I called a lawyer I knew from a case years ago where we pulled his mother out of a house fire. His name was Robert Chin, a family law attorney who owed me nothing but was the kind of man who helped people because it was the right thing to do. Robert agreed to take James's case for free, pro bono. When I told him the story, there was silence on the other end of the phone for a good 10 seconds. Then he said, "Frank, that's the most heartbreaking thing I've ever heard. I'll be at your firehouse tomorrow morning." And he was. Robert came in the next day with a legal pad and spent 3 hours with James going through every detail. He was meticulous, thorough, the kind of lawyer who leaves no stone unturned. When he was done, he looked at me and said, "We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." Meanwhile, Danny had been busy too. He'd called the local news. He'd posted James' story on our firehouse social media page. He'd reached out to other firefighters, police officers, nurses, and teachers in the community, and something remarkable started to happen. People responded. Within 24 hours, our firehouse was flooded with calls and messages. People wanted to help. They wanted to donate money, offer child care, write letters to the court. A retired teacher named Margaret Collins called and said she would testify that James was a devoted father. She'd taught Lily in 2nd grade and had seen James at every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every bake sale. A nurse at Cooper Hospital named Angela Rodriguez called and said she would testify about the urgency of Lily's condition and the impossibility of the situation James had been in. Pediatric surgeon Dr. William Hayes wrote a letter to the court explaining that the transplant had been a matter of life and death and that any delay could have been fatal. But it was Marcus who broke my heart the most. Robert arranged for us to get a message to Marcus through the Foster family. Danny's wife, Maria, brought over a stuffed fire truck that we keep at the station for kids who come through after a fire. She wrote a note that said, "Your daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky. He's coming to get you." Soon, the foster mother later told us that Marcus slept with that fire truck every single night and wouldn't let go of the note. He kept asking when his daddy was coming. He kept saying he'd been brave, just like his daddy told him to be. I had to step outside when I heard that. I stood in the firehouse bay and I cried like I haven't cried since my mother's funeral, because that little boy had done everything right. He'd been brave. He'd waited. He'd trusted his father, and the reward for all that trust and bravery was being taken away from the only parent he had. The court hearing was scheduled for November 22nd, 2 weeks after James first walked into our firehouse. Robert had built an incredible case. He had character witnesses, medical testimony, expert opinions on the impossibility of the situation. He had letters from dozens of community members vouching for James as a father, but we all knew it would come down to the judge. It would come down to one person's decision about whether the rules mattered more than the circumstances. I put on a suit that morning. My dress uniform was at the dry cleaners, so I wore the suit I keep for funerals and weddings. Danny came with me. So did 6 other firefighters from our house. We filled an entire row in the courtroom gallery. When James walked in, he saw us and he stopped. His eyes went wide and then they filled with tears. He hadn't expected us. He didn't know we'd come, but we were there because that's what you do. You show up for people. You stand beside them when the world is trying to crush them. The judge was a woman named Catherine Torres. I'd never met her, but Robert told me she was fair. Tough, but fair. The prosecutor laid out the case. Child left unattended in a vehicle for approximately 4 hours. Father knowingly and willfully abandoned his minor child in a parking garage. Child was found alone, distressed by a passerby who contacted police. On paper, it sounded terrible. On paper, it sounded like neglect. But paper doesn't tell you that the father was on an operating table giving away a piece of his own body to save his daughter's life. Paper doesn't tell you about the broken hip that took away his only child care option the night before. paper doesn't tell you about the 2 years of waiting for a transplant mat, the sleepless nights, the dialysis appointment, the mounting medical bills, the weight of raising 2 children completely alone. Then Robert stood up and told James's story. He told it the way it needed to be told, with every detail, every impossible choice, every moment of desperate love that had led to that parking garage. He called Dr. Hayes, who testified that Lily would not have survived another 3 months without the transplant. He called Angela Rodriguez, who described James sitting in the hospital lobby begging for someone to help him, tears streaming down his face before he made the hardest decision of his life. He called Margaret Collins, who told the judge about the father she'd watched show up for his daughter every single day, the father who volunteered in the classroom, who packed perfect lunches, who never missed a single event. And then Robert called me. I walked to the front of that courtroom and I sat in the witness chair and I looked at Judge Torres. Robert asked me to describe what I'd observed about James Whitfield's character in the time I'd known him. I said, "Your Honor, I've been a fire captain for 35 years. In that time, I've seen courage that would take your breath away. I've seen firefighters run into buildings that were seconds from collapse. I've seen mothers shield their children with their own bodies. I've seen ordinary people do extraordinary things when lives were on the line. James Whitfield is the bravest man I've ever met. He gave a piece of his body to save his daughter's life when the entire world was working against him. He made an impossible choice, not because he's a bad father, but because he's the best kind of father, the kind who would sacrifice everything, including his own freedom, for his child. If that's a crime, Your Honor, then I don't understand the law anymore." The courtroom was silent when I finished. I looked at James, and he was crying silently, his shoulders shaking. I looked at the judge, and I saw something in her eyes that gave me hope. I saw her seeing him, not as a case file, not as a defendant, but as a father. Judge Torres took a recess. She was gone for 45 minutes, the longest 45 minutes of my life, and I've waited inside burning buildings for rescue. When she came back, courtroom went dead silent. She looked directly at James and she said, "Mr. Whitfield, I have reviewed every piece of evidence and testimony presented today. I have read the letters from your community. I have considered the law, and I have considered the extraordinary circumstances of your situation." She paused. "The law exists to protect children. That is its highest purpose. And in reviewing this case, I have to ask myself a fundamental question. Was Marcus Whitfield endangered by his father's actions? Or was Lily Whitfield saved by them?" I held my breath. The evidence is clear that Mr. Whitfield exhausted every available option before making the decision he made. The evidence is clear that the surgery was a matter of life and death. The evidence is clear that Marcus was left in a safe location with means of communication and that no harm came to him. And the evidence is overwhelming that James Whitfield is not a neglectful father. He is a desperate one. There is a vast and important difference. She straightened in her chair. This court dismisses all charges against James Whitfield. Furthermore, this court orders the immediate return of Marcus Whitfield to his father's custody. And I want to say something directly to you, Mr. Whitfield. James looked up at her. He could barely see through his tears. You did what any good parent would do. You saved your daughter's life. This court will not punish you for that. Go home. Hold your children. You've earned it. The courtroom erupted. Our entire row of firefighters stood up and applauded. People I didn't even know were on their feet, clapping, crying. Danny grabbed my shoulder, and I could feel him shaking. James collapsed into Robert's arms, sobbing so hard he couldn't stand. I've been in rooms that were engulfed in flames. I've been in situations where I was sure I wouldn't make it out. But I have never felt relief like I felt in that moment. Raw, overwhelming, bone-deep relief that the system, for once, had gotten it right. That mercy had won over rules, that a father would go home to his children. James got Marcus back that same afternoon. Robert drove him to the foster home personally. The foster mother, a kind woman named Diane, met them at the door with Marcus already in his jacket and shoes, clutching the stuffed fire truck. When Marcus saw his father, he ran. He ran as fast as his little legs would carry him, and he jumped into James's arms and he said, "I was brave, Daddy. I was brave the whole time." James held him so tight, I thought he might never let go. He said, "I know you were, buddy. I know you were. Daddy's here now. Daddy's never leaving again." Robert told me later that James sat in the car for 20 minutes after that, just holding his son, rocking him, whispering to him. He couldn't drive. He was shaking too hard. Now, let me pause again. If this story is getting to you, if you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, just telling it, that like button. Share this video, because stories like this need to be heard. People need to know that sometimes the system gets it right, but only because regular people stand up and fight for what's right. About a month later, I was at the firehouse making dinner for the crew. It was my night to cook. I make a decent lasagna. Nothing fancy, my mother's recipe. The front door opened and James walked in with Lily and Marcus. Lily was thin and pale, still recovering, but she was walking on her own. She was alive. She was smiling. Marcus ran straight to Danny and said, "Mr. Danny, look, I still have the fire truck." James came over to me and he didn't say anything at first. He just hugged me right there in front of my whole crew, and I hugged him back. When he pulled away, he had tears in his eyes, but they were different tears than the ones I'd seen before. These were grateful tears, hopeful tears. He said, "Captain, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. You didn't have to help me. You didn't know me, but you showed up for me and my kids when nobody else would." I told him I was just doing what my mother taught me. He shook his head. "No," he said, "you did more than that. You gave me back my family." We sat down and had lasagna together, all of us, the crew, James, Lily, Marcus, and for about an hour, that firehouse felt like what it's supposed to feel like a home, like a family, like a place where people take care of each other. No questions asked. Look, I need to ask you for a favor. If this story is resonating with you, if you're seeing the importance of fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, I need you to share this. Send it to a parent who's struggling. Send it to someone in law enforcement or the court. Send it to someone who needs to be reminded that there are still good people in this world who will show up for strangers. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the other stories I'm going to share, and leave me a comment telling me what you think. Would you have done what James did? About 6 months later, I got a call from James. He told me Lily was doing incredible. She was back in school. She was playing soccer. She was living the life of a normal 9-year-old, the life she almost never got to have. Marcus was thriving too. He'd started telling everyone at school that his daddy was a superhero. James laughed when he told me that. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh. It sounded like freedom. But he also told me something else that took my breath away. He said, "Captain, I've been thinking about what happened to me, about how close I came to losing everything, and I realized there are other parents out there in impossible situations, parents who have to make terrible choices because they don't have help." So I started something. I started a net. It's called the Lily Marcus Foundation. We connect single parents who are facing medical emergencies with volunteer caregivers, people who will watch your kids while you're in the hospital. No charge, no questions asked. We've already helped 14 families, Captain. 14 families who didn't have to go through what I went through. I had to sit down when he told me that. This man who had been brought to his absolute lowest point, who had given a piece of his body to save his child and then had his other child taken from him. This man had turned his pain into a lifeline for others. He'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to him and used it to make sure it never happened to someone else. That's the kind of thing that makes you believe in people. That's the kind of thing that makes 35 years of running into fires worth every scar, every sleepless night, every nightmare. A year later, the Lily Marcus Foundation was recognized by the governor's office for its work families in crisis. James was invited invited to the State House to receive a commendation. He asked me to come with him. I wore my dress uniform this time. When we got there, James spoke to a room full of legislators and community leaders. He told his story, the whole thing, from Lily's diagnosis to the parking garage to the courtroom. He didn't leave anything out. He didn't sugarcoat it. He stood up there and he was honest and he was brave and he was everything his children think he is. When he finished, the room gave him a standing ovation. Legislators who argue about everything for a living stood up and applauded a warehouse worker from Camden who had given everything he had for his kid. And then James did something I didn't expect. He pointed to me in the audience and he said, "I want you all to meet Captain Frank DeLuca. He's the reason I'm standing here today. When I had no one, he opened his door. When I had no voice, he spoke for me. When I had no hope, he gave me his. If you want to know what a hero looks like, don't look at me. Look at him. I'm not a man who gets embarrassed easily. You can't be in this job, but I felt my face get hot and my eyes get wet. I shook my head because I don't think of myself as a hero. Heroes are the men and women I work with every day who risk their lives for strangers. Heroes are parents like James who sacrifice everything for their children. I'm just a guy who answered the door when someone knocked. But that's the thing, isn't it? That's what it all comes down to. Answering the door, showing up, being there when someone needs you. It doesn't take a cape or a badge or a title. It takes a willingness to see another person's pain and say, I'm going to help you carry that. The Lily Marcus Foundation is still operating today. 7 years later, it's helped over 200 families. It's provided thousands of hours of emergency child care for parents facing medical crises. It's kept families together when the system would have torn them apart. And it all started because a broken man walked into a firehouse on a rainy Wednesday and someone listened. That's what I mean when I say our choices matter. Whether you're a firefighter or a teacher, a judge or a janitor, a CEO or a cashier, you have the power to change someone's life. Not with money, not fame, not with connections, just with your time, your attention, your willingness to care about someone else's crisis as if it were your own. Choose to answer the door. Choose to show up. Choose to fight for the people who can't fight for themselves. Because those choices ripple out in ways you'll never fully see. They save lives. They rebuild families. They create the world we all want to live in. If this story meant something to you, if you believe that every parent deserves the chance to be with their children, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And check out the next video on your screen. I've got another incredible story that will change the way you see the world. I've been running into fires 35 years because I believe something simple. Every life matters, every family matters, every person who walks through your door deserves to be heard, to be helped, to be treated like they matter, because they do. And when we forget that, when we let rules become more important than people, we've already lost the most important thing. Thank you for listening to my story. God bless you. Take care of each other. Show up whenever you can.